Tom Sheridan, who just gave us the thumbs up to get started. My name is Dan Migala, longtime steering committee member, and I feel like I get the honor of introducing myself. So I was going to do that like cheesy Austin Powers, like allow myself to introduce myself, but I guess I did it, right, by accident, just even thinking about it. This will hopefully be a very fun, entertaining, as well as educational session. You'll see there's no PowerPoints, this is low-key, unplugged, and it's really in the spirit of what I'm going to be talking about, which is really stepping outside of your comfort zone, so to speak, and really looking at the art of creating non-traditional revenue, new ideas for prospecting, new ideas for event development, and then how do you monetize it. One of the themes that we're really going to talk about today from a revenue generation standpoint is helping you to see color where you used to see black and white. So really think about it. Think about all the areas of your business. Think about all the areas of revenue generation where there's a traditional box, there's a traditional black and white structure to the process of how we do this, and how do we then see color in a new approach to that, and hopefully give you some examples. I'm going to share some successes as well as failures through the process to do it. So if you've heard me talk, or a lot of my background in I guess the passion behind new ideas and creativity was really rooted about 5 or 6 years ago. We did a project with the Chicago White Sox where we actually changed the game time, the starting of the game time, from 7:05 to 7:11, and sold it to 7-Eleven as sponsorship. So think about it from all the challenges that we go through. Of you've got to build signs, you've got to get inventory approved, and this was kind of like a perfect wow moment, right? That like they're buying 6 minutes of air, there's no hard cost, and it so perfectly matches what that brand is trying to do. The idea just kind of it's sold itself. So what happened to me was, all of a sudden then I get brought on to other team projects of, hey, we need a big idea. What do you got, right? And it's really hard to define how to create that. We all want that, right? Like, who couldn't kind of have that? Why couldn't I think of that? And I started to almost feel like like a one-hit wonder, like the Milli Vanilli of sports sponsorship, right? Of, okay, maybe that's as good as it's going to get. And what occurred to me was, there's got to be a balance. There's an art to coming up with the big idea, but there's also the balance of the science of it, right? There's the process leading up to the moment, and how do you recreate it? And I didn't understand that fully. And I want you guys to understand it's not just okay, we're going to brainstorm, whiteboard, get over caffeinated, and come up with a big inventory idea. It's really then thinking it through, and I'm going to give you some specific takeaways. I actually teach a class at Northwestern on non-traditional revenue strategies for sports teams. So it's very much even some takeaways that hopefully to try to educate you on the process. But as in many things that we do in our business, we don't learn from our home runs, right? We learn from striking out. And I wanted to share with you probably one of my biggest failures, in this process, was working with the San Diego Padres. And we had Stanley Tools as one of our big prospects. So, they make, obviously, tools, hammers, tape measures, screwdrivers, drills, etc. And I really was kind of fixated on this idea of giving them a big idea. And how many, you get in that situation that you want that non-traditional inventory. And I was staring at our foul pole. It's yellow. Stanley's logo is yellow. I thought we could have a tape measure home run. And, I had our arts department kind of whip up the graphic of what it could be. And there's the tape measure. Vertical home run. Dick Enberg's our play-by-play guy. I had him, oh my, here's a part of the presentation. And I flew out all the way to Connecticut from California to pitch it to them. And get ready, I got little presentation. I've got my video ready to go, and the brand team walks in. And the main brand manager introduced his team, and he said, okay, we've got Jane here, who oversees our hammers. Bill here oversees our drills. And then we've got Gary over here, who basically oversees some of our smaller ancillary brands, little things like tape measures and stuff that are about 1% of our market share. Awesome, right? So what do you do in that moment? I mean, as salespeople, we're naturally kind of insecure, right? But that was like, leg is shaking like Thumper. What do you do in that moment? And I just presented it. And everything was built around that, but it was so clear that I failed in the process of it, right? I believed in the idea. I mean, it was like the Padres office, me leaving to go do this presentation. I mean, Dick Enberg, Tony Gwynn, everybody knew about it. And this was like going to be, hey, we're already going to be on the front page of all these newspapers with this idea. Let's do it. And I failed to look at the idea through the lens of the buyer and really think about that through these big ideas. And I can go back and give you some lessons through the 7-Eleven example of that. But I mean, that was part luck, right? But the process then of failing in doing it. So I go ahead, I pitched it, knowing that I was like walking into like a kamikaze mission, right? I mean, it was just not going to happen. And they responded, they asked questions. They were trying to be nice, I think, but I mean, they could see that I was bombing. And that was one of the longest plane rides I ever had home. It was about a 2-hour drive from the middle of nowhere to Connecticut to the airport in the snow. It was in January. I flew home, and I really, and it was a good, honest self-assessment of a moment of truth, if you will, of learning from failure. And I decided that what I would do is, I'm fixated. I'm a journalist at heart, and I think if we do our job as inventory creators, and we see color where we used to see black and white, we become really good storytellers, right? But I think one of the lessons of this process is seeing the story not through your own side, but again, through the lens of the buyer. And I think that's very important. So let me give you some specific examples of things on a broad scope to think about, and then I'll give you some more examples and specific lessons learned. So if the first lesson in the art is to see color where you used to see black and white. We've kind of checked that box, right? But then balance that out with the science of it and see it through the brand's eyes. And here's where it's important, and we'll get to a success here in a second. See it through the brand's CFO's eyes first. So really think about that part of the process. You're thinking like a strategic, you're thinking like the brand through the science of measurement, ROI, revenue generation for the brand, before you're even thinking about the brand values, the CMO, the decision maker. So as crazy as it is, you're coming up with this crazy inventory idea or what's possible. You're marrying that with thinking like the CFO. How can this idea move business? I'll use 7-Eleven as an example, and I use this in my pitches all the time. Scarborough Research, through the CFO's eyes of 7-Eleven. Prior to that deal being done, White Sox fans in Chicago were 10% less likely than the general Chicago population to visit 7-Eleven on a daily basis. So of Chicago residents, the percentage that do go to 7-Eleven on a daily basis, folks that classify themselves as White Sox fans are 10% less likely. After we changed the game times to 7-Eleven, all the announcers talked about it, it became kind of part of the DNA of the White Sox brand and experience. Those same fans in a 12-month period were 25% more likely than the average Chicago resident. That's a great story to tell on the power of the art of owning inventory, owning something that is really almost, I call it like a soulmate for the brand, right? That it so perfectly matches what the brand is trying to do, that there's the measurement off of it. And it's tough, really, because we're all scientists in our minds as far as measurement, but that's one where you start to think about, there's no direct correlation of, okay, they do this and there's a result of it, but it shows you the emotional movement as it relates to ROI. And I've used that specifically in the pitches. So first one, if the art is to see color, we're used to see black and white, we're balancing out, we're thinking like a CFO, we're thinking like a buyer, which I clearly did not do with Stanley, right? Had I done that, I probably would have, maybe we would actually be seeing like I learned actually screwdrivers are where the money is. Apparently that's the thing that you lose, the most, and people tend to have the combination of like 7 Phillips and then no straight head and all that, so at least I learned something from it. Probably would have gotten able to get that done. From an art side, and think about this through these lessons, the goal is it shouldn't feel like an ad. As a consumer, we all know everything is advertising, but the goal is that if we can create something that so perfectly marries with the brand that it doesn't feel like an ad at all. I don't know if everybody thinks about when they heard that game times are 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven's logo was not part of it, but just hearing it, it makes you think about it. My dad, who I think has no idea really what I do. I'm sure there's a lot of sponsorship people that can attest to that. He thinks that that's just the most awesome thing, and it passed my dad's sniff test. So there's something about that. Would my dad think this is an ad? And I think that's really important. And I'll kind of go through some other examples because there's an authenticity really to that, right? So what do we have there? We've got basically the thought that you've thought about it through the buyer's perspective, not your own, and then also you're starting to feel it through the consumer's eyes, which is where engagement comes from. So let me fast forward and I'll give the example then. So I arrived back at the Padres office. They're expecting, this huge deal, and that was a moment of truth, right? That was like the highest of high of, okay, I think we figured out the secret sauce to failure. And I had to share with the office. Not only did they not buy the big idea, they didn't buy anything from us. And it was hard, but I really started to re-engage the process. And then I developed a relationship about 3 months after that with the CEO of TaylorMade Golf. And I started to kind of think about the same process that I went through with Stanley. But instead of seeing tape measures, I saw a golf club. Saw this giant golf club, and I listened to our announcers, and I heard, that's a long drive. He blasted it. And I started to then think through, okay, it needs to be a driver. And I was patient with the idea. I let it go through the process. I actually then started reading the financials of TaylorMade, and I know this sounds crazy, but I actually went and toured the factory just as a regular consumer that shows up, and I learned so much more about their business. I learned where their profit margins were, in particular through it, and then I started to be able to get to know the community relations folks, how this could integrate with their charity, and I held the idea. And we, you have a big idea like that, you want to share it, right? So about, 6-7 months later, after qualifying it, understanding that they're launching this new white driver that's going to innovate, I understood the right story and how to pitch it, and specifically on the science of it. So there I am again. I've got the whole room of people. I've got Mark King from TaylorMade, his grouping of different department heads. And what was really interesting about that, all of those folks that were in there there was a story with that, me not even knowing that they were going to show up, that we had covered. And it was a beautiful thing then. The idea then just sold itself, and we basically handshook on it that day. And I can tell you this, when you have an idea that has that much, thought, specificity, you've kind of gone through the art and the science of both, it's a lot easier to get a higher valuation too, because that's one of the joys of creating new inventory, is because there's no comparable. And then they want to invest in it versus spend. So the result of that was we created an 85-foot golf club out of our right field foul pole. And I can tell you this, again, one of the goals is it shouldn't feel like an ad. I think one of the coolest things about this as a result is there are calls to the ticket office. And they say, hey, I want to sit in a seat that I can see the golf club. Really think about that. I mean, that's a cool story to be able to tell. It's becoming like an iconic part of the San Diego Padre game experience to see it. It's actually pretty interesting to see an 85-foot golf club, as part of your game day experience. Have you ever heard of a fan calling and saying, you know what, I want the seats right in front of the, outfield wall sign, or, I want to be able to see the rotational signage? And that, actually, we'd all love that, right? Deep down. So record that as a voicemail. But you see that process, and that's a good example of not making it feel like an ad. And a good lesson from failure. And, selfishly for me, I think the process of then really hitting kind of a rough patch and then turning it around with a huge win is something that you're going to go through as you pursue new inventory. You can't be afraid to fail as part of this. So part of non-traditional inventory, too, I really believe is also in how you prospect, because then the idea will redefine who you go after. This is not the one-size-fits-all, let's go after a pitch, right? This is really thinking like a brand. And I'll give you an example of how to prospect a new idea that you have. We worked with minor league baseball last year with one of their all-star games, the South Atlantic League. And what we were challenged to do was, how do we get some national attention? How do we generate non-traditional revenue for this all-star game that was going to be in Charleston, South Carolina? And the goal is to get a national brand involved to what is really a local regional event. And we went through an exercise and we focused on what was unique about Charleston, South Carolina. And we really kind of understood that the heartbeat of that town is really around the military. And we started to think about Charleston and this event as a military salute that happens to have the backdrop of a baseball game. It was held in the middle of June, and we're driving, we're doing a site visit, we're brainstorming, and there was an aircraft carrier that was right at the base of a bridge, and we decided to start talking about, could we move the home run derby as part of the all-star experience, and actually do it on the deck of an aircraft carrier, which is, again, we're changing the paradigm. We're able to create an event beyond an event, and could we actually do this? So we got all the permits, figured out how to do it, but we needed to get, obviously, a sponsor for it. So we removed our minor league baseball hat. We thought like a sponsor. If we were a brand and we could own this event, who's the best brand and why? And we actually did that exercise, prospected out, and we had 5 guys in our office do the same exercise. They all came back, and that's actually really interesting. If you look at your inventory, you look at your idea when it's even this broad. If you were a brand of any company, forget about money, who would be the number one to do it? All 5 guys in our office came back with Miller High Life. And the reason was they were launching a national campaign tied to the 4th of July, where you could give a veteran a piece of the High Life for every can that was bought, or every bottle. Number two, it just kind of fits the authenticity of the event. We're toasting, the military, and we really want to get them involved. So we had to do blind outreach to them. And the challenge there was, and this is what you'll find is, sometimes with an idea or an event like this, we pitched it as 7 innings of an idea. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to understand from their perspective that if you owned this event, here's a foundation of what we've come up with. What else are you going to come back to it? And let's not even get in a conversation first about dollars. Let's just talk about what's possible. They loved the fact that, I think we flattered them with that exercise of the 5. And 2, then because we kept it open-ended, they came back and said, Wendell, the big High Life guy from the commercials, they said, we're looking for a national event for him to be at to really kickstart what this could be. But we need to get the Navy SEALs involved, and we've got some extra money from our hospitality budget. Do you have the ability to host military, in particular wounded veterans? So change the whole dynamic of the conversation. This wasn't a pitch, right? We're now having a dialogue where there's no sales. It's really focused on a dialogue where it feels like an internal meeting. The result of it was finalized in 2 weeks. They spent more money than we initially valued the opportunity on. They supported all the media activation. And what's really interesting, and this is part of the art, and this is where it gets fun, is, and the 2 other examples I'm going to share as far as creating this inventory, the thing that you'll find with these types of deals and these types of sponsorships, most of the money actually comes from non-sponsorship buckets. It was hospitality, charity, and community, and they also pulled some out of their media budget for it. So really think about it, because sometimes, we go after, and we're always pitching the sponsorship people, but it was a different path, and it was a good learning experience, and that's another part of the process of these. And I'll tell you this, the brand manager from Miller High Life emailed me actually recently. It got named, it got honored at the winter meetings for one of the promotion awards. And I forwarded him the press release on it. And he then re-forwarded me the whole internal email exchange from the Miller team of after they first got it. And it was basically like, hey, this is really cool, who's going to pay for it? And then, the natural defense mechanism, right? All the brands want to be cool, right? But they also, at the same time, they're budget possessive and everything. And all of a sudden then, as you scrolled up, you know what? I've got X amount of dollars from my hospitality budget. Bob, if you get in on this, we always talk about doing something cool. Let's do this. And it was just a great look through the lens of the buyer and how they kind of collaborated. And all it said on the top when he forwarded that to me, and he bolded the word great, and he said, great ideas always get funded. And I talked to him about it, and really think about that. If you have the power to dream up something great, you're passionate, look at the energy that was created internally and how they communicated from it. And those are people that usually, the hospitality guy's mad that the sponsorship person is, spending money, and then he has to buy tickets against that because we didn't plan for it. But that was a good look at collaboration. And Miller actually is using that as an internal case study now as part of that process. So lessons learned from there. If you dream up something, or if you have a cool spot in your arena, your stadium, you have a great idea for an event, a non-traditional offering, take that time, use your staff to develop that prospect, because then you'll understand through the lens of the buyer, right, what's possible. And think about that first moment, whether you have a relationship with that person or not. If you called and you said, hey, we just dreamt up, we've been working on a big strategy for a new idea, and our entire staff brainstormed, and we think we have a solution for this, we'd like to talk to you about it. Changes the dialogue from the moment you start. So again, great ideas get funded is really the key lesson there, if you go through that process, right? So the fourth example that I'll share, and this is a non-sports example, but I think it's a good look at the process, especially as it relates to budget. Non-traditional inventory as a solution provider, so if you could identify a major problem that a brand has in your market, and how do you then create a storyline with inventory, be it tangible or intangible, to help that brand solve a problem? And I'll give you the example that we did. We have an interesting scope of work, actually, that we do with airports. We do a lot of non-traditional sponsorships in the airport environment. And one of them is, which is actually a great clean slate, because you're talking about consumer engagement. People are bored out of their mind. They want to be enhanced in an airport. And how does a brand do it? You don't want to be interrupted. So the one example that we had was with Lexus. We talked to an agency in LA that represented Lexus, and they said one of their key markets that they have is Boston. And they're trying to grow. There's a high propensity of high net worth individuals, and come back with a proposal with us. Well, we looked at the airport environment. Anybody from Boston? No? I mean, parking at Boston Logan is a disaster. I mean, you could be on a 6 a.m. flight on a Monday morning, leave your house at 4 o'clock in the morning, drive, and there's a good chance you might not get a parking spot because it's just smaller. So we thought about it, and we went back to them and we said, hey, I think we've got an idea to help your sales guys on the floor change the way that they sell cars. If you created a new qualifying question and we're able to have them ask, do you travel for work when people are going in for a test drive? And if they say yes, we want to manage that moment. And what we pitched them was naming rights to the parking garage to Lexus, with the guarantee that if you drive a Lexus, you're guaranteed a parking spot. So really think about that. So what happened then? Now that salesperson can change their entire conversation. High net worth individuals in Boston likely do travel a lot. And now when that person is thinking between Lexus or a competitor, what happens? Oh, you know what? I missed my flight that one time. I'm gonna get the Lexus. The amazing thing was the agency came back and said, you know what? We've got our media budget. We can't spend it, but we loved this idea so much that we pitched it and shared it with our customer retention team, and they would like to buy it out of their budget. So again, great ideas get funded. Looking through the lens of a CFO, that makes sense, because what does Lexus do? They're selling a luxury experience, and the ability to do it, we're creating storylines, right? And same like 7-Eleven, there's not a lot of inventory with this. It's a parking garage, right? So all of that becomes incremental net revenue, and it's something that they're already looking at scaling airports across the country as part of that. And the coolest thing about it, if you're in Boston Logan, two things happen. All those cars are directly up front because they reserve those spots for Lexus. So imagine, you're running late on that Monday morning and you bought a competitor and you're running through, to try to catch your flight. And all of a sudden, there's like 10 rows of Lexuses and you're so mad, right? That might change your even behavior of how you do. And isn't it, at the end of the day, that's what we want to do from a sponsorship perspective. And what's fascinating to me is it came out of a customer retention budget. We always talk about, right? We talk about that we sell partnerships, not sponsorships. So when you dream up new inventory, and we're looking through the lens of a CFO from a buyer side, it really is a partnership, right? And we forget that sometimes. We go through our same channel all the time in the process. And if we're going to see color where we used to see black and white, we need to do that with our prospecting too, right? We need to do that with the people that we go after, because great ideas get funded. And what I found on some of those non-sponsorship decision makers that we talk to, they love this stuff because they don't get to deal with it all the time. Sometimes the sponsorship buyers are a little, no, it's just more paperwork and I got more proposals coming in, and they get kind of mundane sometimes as part of their routine. And this is a wonderful opportunity for somebody in a department that maybe doesn't normally get a chance to shine to really do it. So the lesson from, I think from Lexus is, as it relates to these non-traditional inventory, if you're going to create non-traditional inventory, be a solution provider, our process now is we're not going to go with those ideas directly to the sponsorship people in the same way that we would have when we did TaylorMade. We want to go directly to where the person that's going to really help and be a change, or, and this is interesting, even the CFO as an example. And I'll give a specific one, there. So we talked about yesterday. Steve Dupay did a great job of moderating the sponsorship session yesterday, and Jane Kleinberger from Paciolan asked a really brilliant question. And her question was, from a sponsorship side, what's the number one thing that you want access to? Right? And do you guys remember the answer? You remember or no? So it was access to the fan, access to the consumer, direct channel to be able to know more about them, to be able to engage with them, and to be able to connect with them. And Jane and Paciolan, are light years ahead in terms of how they connect data, with the experience and create a customized platform in the ticketing space and fundraising space. But as it relates to sponsorship, what are opportunities that you can create for a direct channel using your inventory with that? And about a year ago, actually, I had a conversation with a good friend, Baylor board member, Eric Fernandez. And Eric, if you know, actually Eric hired Jamie from AT&T, who was on the panel. Eric used to run global sponsorships for AT&T for about 15 years. Kind of guy that everybody in the room would like to have, write a check to your organization. And I was always fascinated by the technology that Eric had access to. It was like, the wonderful world of toys going into AT&T's office, and I would always bug him about all this stuff that he had access to. Well, Eric has since evolved into, I like to call him an overpriced consultant for a lot of tech companies, and I finally got the opportunity to go and sit down with him, and I asked him the question. We spent about 2 days together of, if you had access to all of the technology and all the stuff that you know, and you owned a team, what would you do? How would you create an opportunity to help sponsors have deeper engagement, just like Nancy talked about from FedEx and what Jane asked about, to be able to integrate it? And Eric basically showed me some algorithms that my journalism degree can't, I think my head exploded, learning some about it. But what he talked about is, he said, everything's about, from a buyer perspective, is about a direct channel straight to the consumer. And what's the best way to do it? It's through these guys. And I said, well, how do you then create inventory against that? And how do you see color where we used to see black and white of just impressions, right? And what Eric went on to explain, and then we actually had the audacity to try it, was to create digital fan networks for teams as digital inventory that teams could then sell to their sponsors, or in the case, actually, new sponsors can come in. I'll give you an example. The University of South Carolina was the first school that we did it with. And actually, the American Hockey League, even on a larger level, we use basically, if you guys have been to Zappos, you go to Zappos and you click on a pair of shoes, and then, later at night, like your wife knows that what you were looking at, or, because she's on the computer, and then it pops up when you go to a newspaper site. Well, we started to look at that same concept as inventory for a team. If you place pixels on your website, and then we're able to, what's the most important thing that Nancy said yesterday? It's the relationship with the fan. So everybody that then comes to your website, when they leave, you've pixeled them, and you start to aggregate a digital fan network, which then you can sell to your advertisers, your sponsors, as activation. You can bring in new partners. And what are they doing? In this case, the color space is the audience. You're buying an audience in terms of inventory. So I'll give you an example. The American Hockey League. They started pixeling their site in August, and they pixeled about 1.5 million fans. And they can now follow those people if they go on CNN, Chicago Tribune. If they're in a grocery store and they've got a brand that wants to reach hockey fans with a special ad, you can even geo-target down to here. And it's really made me think about the process, right? These non-traditional physical spaces of what you could do and how you can monetize it in a different way. Thinking through the lens of the buyer, in this case, what Nancy said, the number one thing that FedEx wants in a sponsorship is direct access to a fan. Think about it if you're one of those organizations. You're the University of South Carolina. If you could create some engagement for FedEx to do a digital campaign directly tied to that, aligning the values of South Carolina, perhaps if you spend X amount on FedEx, you get 2 free tickets to a game, you could start to track those people and follow it. And it's been interesting because it started to attract, and again, what's the whole thought of some of these exercises? Non-traditional ideas, great ideas get funded. Non-traditional ideas also require sometimes non-traditional partners. The AHL just signed, Dollar Shave Club. Anybody member? So little bit of I feel like there's like a cult society of Dollar Shave Club members. Dollar Shave Club is almost like, it's like the Netflix for shaving, where you get a razor, and then you get 4 new blades every month, and it's all digital based. They're a very fun brand. Well, they want to reach men. They want to reach men of a certain age, and they want to reach them online. They would never probably buy traditional inventory at an American Hockey League game, but they are buying the digital inventory because it speaks directly to that. So now you've got this whole new pool of prospects that you can go after as a result. And I think what it does is it changes the conversation, from just traditional inventory to consumer engagement. And Eric actually can explain it a lot more, but I think it's something that you're going to see more and more of. And I think the lesson here is to not just think of your physical inventory, which we did with the tailor-made example, not to think of the intangible inventory like 7-Eleven, but to think about non-traditional digital inventory. And how can you use all those assets? And in a digital space, one of your best assets is your relationship with your fans and your ability to engage with them. So what I wanted to do, I think, more than anything here today was to really give you, not so much just the, hey, wow, these are all cool examples, right? We all want to do deals like this. Buyers want to buy them, but ultimately, let you know the process of it. So I think part of this, and with my students at Northwestern, I started to research big ideas, right? Bold ones that failed, big ones that succeeded, and I wanted to know what it felt like. And I wanted to share, in closing, a non-sports, non-sponsorship example, because I think it's a good metaphor for what we all feel. I read a story about a guy who ran a technology company, and he had a specific idea, and he kind of was writing it down in a notebook, and it was a big idea, but it was going to take the company in an entirely different direction. And what do? We're very traditional, right? We're very habitual. We think the same all the time. And he was afraid that the people in his office and his colleagues might laugh at him, right? A little bit, because we feel that too, with sharing a new idea that might take you in a different direction. And he had some major life events that changed, and finally he shared the idea with his wife. And he said, honey, I've got this idea I've been tinkering around with. What do you think? And I've been kind of thinking in my mind for the last 2 years what this could be. He showed her the notebook. And she said, honey, this is brilliant. Why'd you wait? And he said, well, I just, we kind of tend to live in fear, right? And she said, go tell the guys in the office. Well, they did it. Everybody else loved it, and it accelerated. And that was the iPod. And that was Steve Jobs. And I think about that every time I come up with a new idea or think about, it's okay to feel fear, right? To suggest it. But if you and your organization really want to be great, wouldn't we all want to have a brand like Apple? And how many times do you think about taking your organization in a different direction? Think about stepping out of your comfort zone to try something new. The iPod, I think, is a great metaphor for it of, the White Sox didn't say, we can't change our game times. Say, why can't we? And watch the enthusiasm and the collaboration go. I guarantee you, if you followed that, 12 months from now when we're sitting here in Dallas, it'll be one of you up here that you can find one of those ideas. And the interesting thing that ultimately happens when you start to create a culture like that with your organization, what do you think happened in San Diego after we did that one tailor-made deal? New prospects came in and said, hey, can you come down and do an exercise with us, just like you did with TaylorMade? Your current partners, hey, how can we do more? We'd love to have a cool idea like that. We'd love to have deeper engagement, because they all want to be great too. Commit to it. Commit to spend some time to see color where you used to see black and white. Commit to thinking like a CFO. Commit to thinking a little bit, and it's a bad phrase, outside the box, right? But see color where you used to see black and white. Think about areas of your business, areas of revenue generation that tend to be a little stagnant, and how can you hit a little bit of enthusiasm, hit the gas pedal, so to speak. So I thought what I'd share is just a couple more bullet points at the end, and then in the spirit of the forum, offer to even send some materials that I share in class too on this process. But I think the checklist is, and I talk about the forum all the time in terms of, I really have this belief that I call it the 48-hour rule. When you get back from the forum, your head's probably going to explode, right, with all the ideas that you had. Or, you go back, you got to return voicemails, you got to justify the expense account from the pub across the street, and how you're going to do that. And you get bogged down, right? And before you know it, it's next Monday, and some of these ideas are tucked away. So I really believe that when you get home, if you want to be great and you want to see color where you used to see black and white, commit within those 48 hours to do a little checklist. And if this would be my recommendation of the checklist. Number 1, see color where you used to see black and white. Make a list of black and white areas of your business, black and white inventory, stuff that's gotten rejected, dead space that you have in your facility. I think number 2, create a dialogue, schedule a meeting to just talk about non-traditional inventory. And set one of the objectives for that meeting to not wear a team-branded polo, but really step out of that comfort zone and take all the knowledge that you have as an ambassador of your team or organization, but have the discipline to look at it through the lens of a brand. So challenge everybody in that meeting to think like a brand. If you knew all this inventory, what brand would you want to manage that you could buy see what you can come up with from a prospecting standpoint, which is the third lesson. Look at it through the lens of the buyer. And then ultimately, I think this is probably the best part about thinking like this, and there's no other way to say it, it's just a ton of fun. I mean, it's great, right? This is like what we got into the business to do, right? Is to innovate, to push the envelope, to have fun. I mean, the negotiations of all these, wouldn't even call them really negotiations. They've been just more conversations, and there's smiles, there's hugs, and there's excitement, enthusiasm, and that's ultimately really what we want, right? And that becomes contagious from a culture standpoint, too. So I'll leave you with that. Commit to hopefully the 48-hour rule. And I'll offer, I've got cards up here. I am more than happy, if you guys want to, I'm happy to email the original deck that we did for Miller High Life as a good example of how do you start it. I've got some deeper case studies on some of the process, of what was gone through. And then even on the digital stuff, the stuff that Eric has translated for me to explain how that processes work. And I think those are some good buckets to start, and hopefully it'll become contagious. So I left a couple minutes, I think, for questions too, if there are any. All right, well, I look forward to seeing the color that you guys create, and hopefully you guys take away and create some wonderful new sponsorships. Thank you.